Thank you, Professor, for this opportunity. It's my honor to be part of this meeting. It's a really honor to be part of this meeting. I want to show you in this case the intrinsic beauty of the brainstem fibers, the intrinsic anatomy of the brainstem fibers tract. Obviously, I want to show every tract in the brainstem, but I think it's impossible. But I will try to show you the most important structures in the brainstem. Just to see, this is the anterior full view of the brainstem. We can divide the brainstem in three parts: the superior part or mesencephalic portion, the central part of the pons, and in the inferior part, the medulla oblongata. Obviously, the most important fibers in the ventral portion, in my opinion, to preserve is the corticospinal fibers tract, like everybody knows. The corticospinal fibers tract is a very important, not just landmark, obviously, is a very important functional pathway. For this reason, I want to share with all of you one picture like this. We totally dissected the tract from the cortex to downward to reach the inferior portion of the medulla oblongata. This is the corticospinal fibers tract. This is the full view of the brainstem, totally dissected. This is the beauty and perfect anatomy, in my opinion. Just to understand the anatomy of the midbrain, I will try to dissect some part, the most important fibers tract and nuclear complex inside in the midbrain. In this picture, I want to show you the most important structure at the level of the midbrain. Obviously, the cerebral peduncle is the most important structure here. The other landmarks is the apparent origin of the third nerve, inner in the interpeduncular fossa. But again, the most important structure here is the cerebral peduncle. The cerebral peduncle we can divide in three portions: the most internal group of fibers, the central portion of the cerebral peduncle, and the most lateral fibers of the cerebral peduncle. What is the most important and critical area? This, the central portion, because here we find the corticobulbar, corticospinal, and corticonuclear fibers tract. Remember this point. What happens if you dissect the central of the cerebral peduncle? Of course, you can reach and find some group of nuclear structures. Like in this case, you can see here the substantia nigra hidden inside in the center of the cerebral peduncle. If you dissect the opposite cerebral peduncle, you see again here the substantia nigra, but over the substantia nigra, like a crown, you can find here the subthalamic nucleus of Lewis. Everybody knows this anatomy. This anatomy is very important, and this is the very good landmark to understand the position of the subthalamic nucleus of Lewis. What happens if you make a gentle dissection? Again, if you continue with the dissection, you can reach many structures inside in the interpeduncular fossa. This is a very nice view of the interpeduncular area, just to understand the position here of the substantia nigra. Again, the apparent origin of the third nerve is very important landmark here, and over the substantia nigra, here the subthalamic nucleus of Lewis. I remove the medial portion of the cerebral peduncle, just to understand the position of this structure, the red nucleus. Obviously, as you see the lower portion of this area, you can reach the interpeduncular nucleus and retroflexus fasciculus of Maynard, one side and the opposite side. These fasciculus coming from the back at the level of the avenular area to reach this interpeduncular nucleus. This is the full view and the beautiful anatomy, just to understand the complexity of the brainstem. I dissect some part in the center of the cerebral peduncle and in the center of the fibers coming from top to down at the level of the pons. Obviously, here the interpeduncular fossa is the very, very important area to understand, because some approaches to this area in some safe entry point is a critical is critical to understand when you project your surgery. Now I want to describe fibers of the lateral surface of the midbrain. This is the very nice and very important area of the brainstem. The lateral surface of the brainstem is one of the most important areas to understand the position of the lateral mesencephalic sulcus. The lateral mesencephalic sulcus is a good landmark to understand the approach to the midbrain. The lateral mesencephalic sulcus is in this position, is here. You can see this point is like a triangle. The limit of this area is the inferior conjunctival branch, the lateral lemniscus in the back, and here the cerebral peduncle in the inferior and anterior limit. This area is critical to understand the disposition of the lateral mesencephalic sulcus. Also, you can see here the forenerve, the superior cerebral peduncle, the interpeduncular sulcus, here the medial cerebral peduncle, and in the back here the dentate nucleus, the most important nucleus inside in the cerebellum, like Professor Akin showed before. This is a closer view, a very nice close view of the lateral mesencephalic sulcus. Everybody knows these structures are very critical and very important to understand the disposition, again, the lateral mesencephalic sulcus. Also, we can see the pineal region and the quadrigeminal plate, superior colliculus, inferior conjunctival branch, running to reach here, this point, and the posterior limit is the lateral lemniscus, and the more ventral and inferior limit is the cerebral peduncle. Now I want to describe the fibers of the posterior face of the brainstem. The posterior surface of the brainstem is a very nice area, and the most important area, of course, is the quadrigeminal plate. The quadrigeminal plate is this, like everybody knows, and the pineal region is very close to this area. The most important structure here is the superior colliculus, one side, opposite side, inferior colliculus, obviously. Here, the frenulum belli, this is the attachment to the superior velomedular. Of course, here below the inferior colliculus, the forenerve, again, the forenerve, and in the lateral position, these fibers are the lateral lemniscus coming from down to reach the inferior colliculus. Of course, in the central position here, this is the superior cerebellar peduncle. The superior cerebral peduncle limits with the medial cerebral peduncle by the intermedial sulcus or interpeduncular sulcus. In the roof of the four ventricles here, between both nucleus here, we find this group of nucleus. These nucleus are the nucleus of the roof of the four ventricles, globoso, emboliforme, and fastigial nucleus. Now I will try to show you some fibers of the most important fibers of the pons. The pons is a very nice structure and very complex structure too, but this is the way like everybody knows the pons. In my opinion, the pons is very, very complex, but it's a more bigger part of the brainstem. We can divide in superficial layers, transversal fibers, the more superficial layer. We can divide in the medial aspect of the pons by the one intermediate layer, transversal layer, and more deep in the more deep layer, they are stratum profundum. To dissect the pons, you must be very gentle, and in that way you can reach this dissection. This is the surface of the pons. Just to understand, this is the more superficial transversal fibers here, here, and here. And if you dissect some of these transversal fibers, you can reach the corticospinal fiber tract. you see the disposition is not rect. It's like a twin. The corticospinal fiber tract coming from top to down and make a curve in the direction to reach the decussation at the level of the medulla oblongata. Another critical area is the peritrigeminal area. Everybody knows this area is very useful to reach this aspect of the pons. Here, the motor root and the sensorial root of the trigeminal nerve. I want to show you now, if you dissect the more superficial layer of the pons, you can reach the stratum complexum. The stratum complexum of the brainstem in this part, in the pons, is the more medial transversal fiber. They connect one side to the opposite side of the cerebellum. In the central position, the trapezoidal body, this group of fibers cross the medial line and they be part of the acoustic system. Over the trapezoidal body, we can find here the central nucleus of the pons. This is very important, a group of cellular structure, because this structure is a relationship with the movement of the eyes when you sleep. Now, if you want to see the medial aspect of the brainstem at the level of the pons, you must dissect the medial face. Here, the superficial layers, the superficial fibers of the pons. Here, the corticospinal fibers tract coming from top to down. You can see the intrinsic anatomy for the medial face. Here is the more compact component of the pons. Here, the intermediate layers, or we can call complexum layers. In the back, here, the most important fibers here is the medial lemniscus. The medial lemniscus is who divide the pons in ventral portion and dorsal portion. This is the ventral portion of the pons, and this is the dorsal portion of the pons. Of course, these structures are very important to understand when you planning arrive to the pons. If you dissect step by step the pons from ventral to dorsal, the most important structure you can find in the first time is these fibers. They are the transversal fibers, the stratum profundum. Again, this stratum connects one side with the opposite side of the cerebellum. In the lower part of the picture, in the opposite direction, you can find these vertical fibers. These fibers are the medial lemniscus, coming from down to upward to reach, in this way, the ventroposterolateral nucleus of the thalamus, like everybody knows. Now I'll remove some part of that fiber to understand the position of the medial longitudinal fasciculum here, running in the deep inside in the four ventricular floor. Next to it, here, the tectospinal tract. They connect the tectum with the inferior olive. And now I preserve the most important fibers here is the medial lemniscus, like I said before, and next to it here, the most deep transversal fibers of the pons. Now I want to remove these fibers to understand of the new tracts. Again, medial longitudinal fasciculum, next to it, tectospinal tract, close to the tectospinal tract, a little bit more anteriorly, here, ventral, in ventral position, this is the central tegmental tract. Next to the central tegmental tract, in oblique position, the mesencephalic nucleus of the five nerve. And of course, here, the nucleus ceruleus. Everybody knows nucleus ceruleus, the more important group of cellular with noradrenaline concentration in the floor of the. I remove some tracts and preserve the mesencephalic nucleus of the five and nucleus ceruleus, just to understand the disposition of this structure. Everybody see this structure. This is the anterior view of the superior cerebral peduncle. Of course, here, the lateral recess. Now, This is the full view, the totally full view in the big window. I made a big window to understand the complexity of this dissection, to see, like I want to show you now in the closer view, the decussation of the superior cerebral peduncle from a ventral view. The cerebral peduncle, in this case, the superior cerebral peduncle, make the decussation under the inferior colliculus at the level of the midbrain, like everybody knows. But this view is a little bit different because you can see from ventral vision. Here, again, in the center of the superior cerebral peduncle, here, the nucleus ceruleus. If you follow these fibers, you can see how rich this area. This is the junction between the midbrain and the pons. Now, we continue with the dissection at the level of the vulvomedular portion. This is the critical area. I listened to Professor Touré in one talk talking about this area, and like he say, is a very, very important area. It's totally different if you compare with the pons, with the midbrain. It's a critical and very little area. It's very important to know. If you dissect this area, you must be concentrate your vision in this aspect of the brainstem, the more lower part. The most important landmark and nuclear structures here and tracts are this. Here we see the pyramid. The pyramid is the continuation, of course, of the corticospinal tract, under to reach this point, the decussation of the corticospinal tract. Obviously, next to it, you have here the olive and the preolivar and postolivar sulcus. Behind of the postolivar sulcus, the inferior cerebral peduncle. But in the left side of this picture, I make a cut here, and I make a cut here, to take off this part and discover in this way these vertical fibers. What type of fibers are these? Obviously, this is the medial lemniscus fibers coming from down to upward to reach at the level of the thalamus, the ventral posterior lateral nucleus of the thalamus. Remember I told you before, the shape of the medial lemniscus is like a C with the concavity at the level of the pons to ventral. This is a very, very important landmark because divided the pontine area in one ventral and dorsal portion. This is the closer view just to understand the position of the leaf, the preolivar sulcus, retroolivar sulcus, and posteriorly the inferior cerebral peduncle. Obviously, if you cut here and cut here, you can understand the disposition of the fibers of the medial lemniscus. Now, in the lateral view, the most important fiber tract here are in the retroolivar sulcus. But the preolivar sulcus is very dangerous because it's very close with the pyramid here. This is the leaf, and these fibers around it, the name is the amiculum of the olive. They run around of the olive. Behind of the olive, we see here the retroolivar sulcus. The most important tract here, obviously, is here the spinothalamic tract, and a little bit more deep, rubrospinal fiber tract. Obviously, in the dorsal aspect of this picture, we can find here the inferior cerebral peduncle. You must be take careful at this level because it's very close with the corticospinal fiber tract. To finish my exposition, I want to tell you some words about the four ventricles. This is a critical area, and for me, it's one of the most beautiful areas to dissect. The four ventricle is like a rhomboidal shape, but we have three parts. The first one is the superior triangle at the level of the pons. In the center of the imaging here is the junction portion, and in the inferior part of this slide is the inferior triangle at the level of the medulla oblongata. This is like everybody knows the four ventricle. the most important and critical landmark is the facial colliculus in the floor of the four ventricle. Everybody knows we have a suprafacial approach, infrafacial approach, and for the middle line. Some problems we can take at the level of the middle line, because here, hidden inside in the floor, run the medial longitudinal fasciculum. They connect the fibers of this tract, connect the nucleus of the sixth, fourth, and third nerve. But if you dissect the four of the four ventricle, you need to remove the dorsal aspect of the brainstem. You need to remove these structures. To remove this structure, I prefer remove first the left side to understand what you see if you remove this. Obviously, if you do that, you can understand the disposition in this picture of the facial colliculus. Here, the facial colliculus, the nucleus of the sixth, the nucleus of the seventh, and the inferior, vertical, and superior portion of the seventh nerve. Of course, here, I remember I tell you before, this is the dentate nucleus. But what happens if you remove this area? Okay, I remove this portion and I not dissect the right side just to compare with the left side. The floor of the four ventricle, we can divide for the medial sulcus and for the limitant sulcus in the side next to the superior cerebral peduncle. Remember, the superior cerebral peduncle and the inferior cerebral peduncle both are the limits of the four ventricle, never the medial cerebral peduncle. The most important structure, like I tell you before, is the facial colliculus. Also, in the inferior triangle, we find very critical structures like a tectospinal tract, central tegmental tract, and inside in the interior of the inferior peduncle, here the nucleus ambiguus, and here the trigeminal fibers tract. But the most important structure here at the level of the calamus scriptorius is the triangles of the 12th nerve and triangle of the 10th, hypoglossal and vagal triangle. I dissect the right side to see in this way the striae, the acoustic striae, here running from the lateral to medial in the medial aspect of the four ventricular floor. Just to understand the disposition of this area, I dissect a little more gentle and I dissect some nucleus here in the floor of the four ventricle. In the four ventricle is, like I said before, a critical area, and over the hypoglossal and vagal nucleus, we find some group of critical areas like a perihypoglossal nucleus, like a nucleus of roller and nucleus prepositus. In the middle, intercalatus nucleus, but in this case, I can dissect. Again, here, the tectospinal tract, central tegmental tract, here nucleus ambiguus, and here the trigeminal spinal tract. Sorry. Here I remove some acoustic part just to understand this tract. This is the nucleus and tract of fasciculus solitarius inside in the deep of the four ventricles. To finish, this fiber coming from this tuberculum gracilis and cuneatus. I remove these superficial layers just to discover these fibers coming from this cuneatus and gracilis nucleus and reach in the ventral portion of at the level of the obex, anterior to the obex, anterior to the gray matter at the level of the medulla oblongata, and behind of the pyramid. These fibers cross the middle line to reach the opposite side, and in that way running to upward to reach, like a medial lemniscus, the thalamus at the level of the nucleus of the thalamus, like I said before. Just 1 minute, and I want to show you some picture, and I want to say some words about the most important person, I think, in my career and in my life. The first one, everybody knows Professor Evandro. He was a great mentor for me. He made my recommendation letter for for reach the Rhoton lab. And I was with him in Sao Paulo in the lab with these partners. I have the best memory about all of them. And I want to say thank you, Dr. Evandro. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your help. And I want to say and send my best regard for you. This is a very important picture. This is my grandfather and my father. There was neurosurgeons too. I miss both. Obviously, this is a funny picture of my mentor. He's Pablo Rubino. Everybody knows him. And this funny picture was taken a few days ago in one trial with him. He stopped in the middle of the road and say, "Max, I want to eat. This is the typical food of my country. The name is choripan." And Professor Evandro loved this food. It was very, very funny. Pablo was my mentor. He's still my mentor. But in this moment, I think, I am sure I can call him my friend. Thank you, Pablo, for your support for all these years to teach me. Obviously, some words about this great woman. Robin, thank you very much. You was like my mother in Gainesville. I love you. Thank you very much. And this man don't need presentation. Thank you, Professor Evandro, for giving me the opportunity to be in your lab. I can never know him because the same day when I arrived to Gainesville, Professor Rhoton died. That was a very bad and very sad time for me. This is the reason why I was alone in the lab, but in another hand, was an extraordinary experience for me. And to finish, this is my partner, this picture in UPMC Pittsburgh, when I was a fellow of this special man. For me, sometimes I can't find some words to describe what I feel or I think about this man. Probably he changed my career. He gave me one opportunity to accept me in Pittsburgh. After that, he gave me the best opportunity in my life to show my work in Chicago in 2016. I remember, I can't forget that. He trusted me in that time. And now in this part of my life, Professor Fernandez Miranda gave me a new opportunity, a new step in my life. It's a challenger for me. He gave me the opportunity to reach and continue learning from him in Stanford. It's amazing for me. Think about that. I don't know how can I say thank you, but
I am the one learning from you, Max. Like many of us here listening to this lecture on the brainstem. You know, I've never seen such a beautiful lecture, and I was here with the lights off and yes, you know, resting while I was seeing the presentation. I wish we could do it in 3D. And actually, we talk about doing some of these presentations in 3D, but yes, it's quite complicated, you know, with the computer. But it's just some food for thought. Some of the participants might think of a way to do it that is easy and affordable. But I really enjoy your presentation, Max.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you again, and thank you for trusting me again. I hope in my heart see you again soon. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you all of the committee for this opportunity for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Max. Beautiful work.